Okay, this is session 2, and it very much it's called Wonder of Wonders, and it very much goes with what in Shakespeare had Hamlet say, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy.
Yeah. And you know what I love? It does blow your mind.
Yeah, it does.
These things will blow your mind. If you haven't heard about them, or if this is a refresher, you will have your mind blown.
Yeah, yeah. I like to look over it. It blows my mind every time. So So, well, first of all, it's called cosmology, and you know, Mr. Carl talked about the cosmos. That's the universe, and so it's a simplified history of the Big Bang, which is a terribly inconvenient fact. And so, well, the history of the Big Bang is, we'll start with the Greeks. And the Greeks, like many people, thought that the universe was eternal and always existed the way it had today and would always exist for forever and ever. Well, that changed when Einstein and others began to see the different movements in cosmic radiation and understanding. He created the theory of relativity that tended to talk about the universe having a beginning. And this was not accepted by many scientists originally because it just couldn't be. It could not be. But they began to experiment. There's Lemaitre and Friedman in the 1920s. They created theories how the universe was expanding. And so the idea is it expanded from a single point. 1920, Edwin Hubble, inventor of the Hubble telescope, actually the Hubble telescope is named after him. He concluded that the universe was flying apart at enormous velocities, which didn't make any sense. So in 1949, Fred Hoyle called it the Big Bang, and he was speaking derisively, like, the Big Bang. Well, it stuck, and that's what it was called. 1940s, George Gamow talked about the background radiation of the universe, and he said, this was in the 40s, he says, well, if in fact the Big Bang did happen, then the background temperature of the universe would be a few degrees above absolute zero. That was in the 40s. Well, in 1965, a couple of scientists actually showed that it was 3.7 degrees above absolute zero. So today, where are we going with this? With our expanding universe, we have a fine-tuned universe. And there's something called the anthropic principle. Anthropic means humans. And the universe, of what we live in, our planet, and the way we're positioned in the universe makes it possible for us to live. And in any other way, any other fine-tuning this, it would not have worked. That's called the anthropic principle. There are things in physics called constants. And a constant, for instance, the number of subatomic particles in the universe is 10 to the 80th power. That's how many there are. That's 10 with 80 zeros after that. The number of seconds in the entire history of the universe since the Big Bang is 10 to the 17th power. It's 10 with 17 zeros after it. That's an example of a constant. One of my favorite constants is gravity. Gravity is finely tuned, and this really is one of my favorites, because if you take a ruler and you stretch it across the entire face of the known universe, and then you split it up into 1-inch segments, billions and billions and billions of 1-inch segments. Now, if you should actually move it 1 inch to 1 inch of the other side, then it would create a different gravity. Wow. And the gravity would be so different that every land animal that was bigger than an insect would be crushed. that's us too, by the way.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we're bigger than an insect.
We're much bigger than an insect. That's right. That's one of my favorites. There's the subatomic particles, where the electromagnetic force within the atom, and it produces an attractive force. And if in fact that what's called the strong force that binds the nucleus together with the electrons within the atom, if that was changed, then all the atoms would fly apart except hydrogen.
Wow.
Yeah, but we're made of atoms too, so that wouldn't work for us. Yeah. Then there's the weak force, and it's fundamental. It underlies types of radioactivity. That's also finely tuned.
And so it's so, finely tuned that an alteration in its value by even 1 out of 10th to the 100th power would prevent any life-preventing environment.
Yeah, just 1 part, 10 to the 120th.
Oh.
You said that.
Yeah, to the 100th part.
Yeah, to the 100th part, right.
Yeah.
Okay, and then there's what's called the cosmological constant. And the cosmological constant is the measure of energy density in empty space. It's part of Einstein's theory of relativity. So a change in its value would change the acceleration of the expansion of the universe, and if you change it 1 part in 10 to the 120th part, then the universe wouldn't allow life.
Wow. Definitely some fine tuning going on there.
Absolutely. So then these constants work together too, like gravity and the cosmological constant put together. Then if you fine tune that to 1 part in, and this is good, 100 million trillion 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 trillion. I think I've said all the trillions, and that's tuned gravity and the cosmological constant such that if you shot an arrow from one side of the known universe to the other side of the known universe, talking about billions of light years, and you'd have to be able to hit one single atom on the other side.
Wow.
That'd be a pretty good shot there.
Wow.
Yeah. So then there's also the difference in the mass of neutrons and protons within the atom, so that if 1 part in 700 and the nuclear fusion of the stars would not be possible. So there'd be no energy for life.
I don't think that these things are really taught. I don't think most people have any concept of these things, because they've been educated to believe that, it just happened by accident and here we are.
Well, yeah, it all kind of works,
Yeah, it just kind of works.
Yeah.
Just kind of fits in, out of chaos. All this fine tuning became into being.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, then there's astronomy, which is an amazing thing too. It seems that, the Milky Way is this spiral galaxy. I mean, there's different shapes of galaxies. Ours is a spiral, and our planet happens to live in a place within one of those spiral arms called the safe zone.
Okay.
Of this spiral arm. Any other place would be subject to gamma rays and asteroids and all kinds of things. Not to mention the black hole is in the middle of the universe too. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, we have within the solar system defenders, and those defenders, oddly enough, are different planets. Jupiter, for example, and even Saturn and Uranus protect us from comets and asteroids. There's an asteroid belt that's out there. And now our moon does not protect us, does not absorb some of those free-floating objects, but you can see by the surface of the moon what it looks like when an object is actually struck by some of these big craters in the moon are an example. We have some on Earth. You know, there's some places where different asteroids have hit the Earth, and so they create craters. But the moon is just completely full of them, and so yeah, they protect us.
Yeah. Wow. So we're protected.
Yeah.
And so our placement is
In
very
the solar system. Yeah.
Yes, in the solar system is very strategic, because if we were closer to the sun, like Venus is, our oceans would just boil off because it would be too hot. And then further out, the more CO2 and the less oxygen, we would have not enough oxygen for mammals, and the atmosphere would prevent permanent freezing.
Yeah, and the sun, and we don't have time to go into all the things the sun provides, but our sun is the right size. There are bigger suns, there are smaller suns. They're called red dwarfs. 80% of suns in the universe are red dwarfs. Now, if our sun was smaller, it would not give us the heat and light and energy. If it was bigger, the solar flares would destroy us. But our sun is exactly the right size.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so the moon. Has a gravitational tilt that stabilizes our climate. And it affects 60% of the tides, which actually flush and cleanse the oceans. That's so incredible, and distribute the heat.
Indeed, in fact, so yeah.
Wow.
And then there's something I call the water world, which I love. It talks about the size of our planet. If Earth was smaller, like Mars, the internal heat would not be enough to sustain the planet, the life on the planet. And Mars is dead. Now, we would be much like Mars if we were smaller. If we were bigger, our gravity would be so great that it would pull down the mountains and cover the earth with water. We would have nothing but a water world. That's why the earth is the correct size for that.
Wow. And there are these shifting plates on Earth and on the land masses, and these actually help regulate the air in our atmosphere. And they when they shift, rock fragments go down to the Earth's mantle and releases carbon dioxide.
Oh, it's amazing.
And that makes the planet warm enough to inhabit.
And in fact, that does not happen on Mars, for example.
Right.
It happens on our planet.
Wow.
Even the shifting of the plates make that happen. Yeah. We have eclipses that allow us to study the sun because of the different sizes of the moon and the sun. They're just perfect, so that occasionally the moon will eclipse the sun, and we can study the corona around the sun.
Wow. Yeah. Incredible.
Now, biochemistry, one of the favorites. It's just crazy. At one time, biologists thought that cells were just these little blobs of protoplasm. I mean, just nothing but a little blob. They have discovered that they're high-tech factories. Incredible, the most complicated factories on the earth. Each cell has about 10,000 proteins. And they have one cell.
Okay.
And how many cells do we have in the body? About 100 trillion. And it's so amazing. They have about 20 different components in these little factories. They have brains, which are called DNA. They have energy plants, which are mitochondria, produce energy. And they have a processor for proteins, for creating proteins, a protein processor, which I love this name, the endoplasmic reticulum. Isn't it great? Anyway, They've got shelving. They got storage shelves, Golgi apparatuses. They got garbage disposals, the lysosomes. They've got energy storage place, like a battery, secretory vesicles. They got fat processors, the peroxysomes, I guess they go. They've got transport systems that move things around, like trucking, molecular pathways. They've got manufacturing units, the ribosomes. And
the ribosomes, these are inside of a cell.
Yes, yes.
Wow.
All that's inside of a cell.
Wow. Yeah. And then these ribosomes are inside of a cell.
Exactly, yes,
okay.
yes, they are. And they very interesting. It does its work just in minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And what else can it do?
It can make a copy of itself.
It can make a copy of itself. It can clone itself.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay. So now, cilia is they're like little projections that are on the cell, and they've got about 200 of them. Each cell has about 200 of these little whip-like structures, and each of the little whip-like structures, each of the 200 have 200 proteins on each one. Yeah, and so some cells are fixed in place, and so what they do is they clean the surface. Mm-hmm. They're constantly rowing, cleaning the surface of the cell. Mm-hmm. But some of them, when the cells move, let's say a blood cell, for example, they're rowing. These little cilia are like they make the cell move through space. Yeah. And then I want to tell you about the most efficient motor in the world. It's called the bacteria propellers, the bacteria flagellum, it's called. If you can imagine the bacteria cell with this little flip out the front, that's its little engine that makes the bacteria move. And they're so incredible. They've got all kinds. They've got a drive shaft, a propeller, a universal joint, a bushing through the cell wall, and a motor. I mean, and what it does, it can spin so fast, and it can stop at a quarter inch and start spinning instantly at 10,000 RPMs in the other direction. I mean,
and a car goes how many RPMs?
Oh, I don't know. It's
6,000.
Several thousand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's probably one or two. I'm not a car guy. So
yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
But less than that.
Yeah. And so there's also blood clotting.
Oh yeah.
And this is amazing. There's 10 steps that it takes in 20 different molecules. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if it's in the brain or the lungs,
if the clot happens.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yes. Yeah. If the clot happens in the brain or the lungs, you die. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If it's too late, you die. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't stop, you die. If if you've got a cut and the clot is only in one section, you die. It's got to be over the entire cut.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing.
And this is an area which is just completely mind-blowing and has started to be studied more and more. Our popular conceptions just haven't caught up yet. It's called DNA, or the biological information.
And each of those 100 trillion cells has 6 feet of coiled DNA within it.
Yeah, back and forth to the sun 70 times.
Wow. These are the building blocks. The 30,000 genes in our 23 pairs of chromosomes work to build over 20,500 proteins.
Yeah. And it's very complex, but it's very simple at base. That there's 4 what are called nucleotides letters. The A, G, C, T. They're called bases, and there's 4 of them. And the Human Genome Project has mapped. The human genome has mapped 3 billion appearances of these, and it takes about 1,200 to 2,000 bases to make one protein. Wow. Yeah, and so, but they don't bond together. The the picture is like a child's magnetic board with 4 letters, and you can magnetize them. You can stick them in and out, so they stick to the strand, but they don't stick together.
Okay.
And they're a library. And here's the interesting part: the DNA is a library. If you can imagine a librarian seeing all the books, but something makes them work.
What makes them work, guys?
We haven't figured that out yet.
What makes all of this work?
We haven't figured that out yet.
Right.
Okay, here's one that's interesting. We talked about the Big Bang Theory. Yeah, and this is the biological Big Bang Theory. That they've divided the geologic periods when they look at the rocks, and they say, well, there's all these different geological periods. They've divided them up, and the popular one we know about from the movies is the Jurassic period. And so there's another one called the Cambrian period, which was, they said, earlier than the Jurassic period. And interestingly, what is interesting about the Cambrian period?
Well, suddenly, in 1 minute of geological time, almost all of the major animal body plans appeared.
Yeah, it's called the biological Big Bang.
Biological Big Bang.
Boom.
Boom.
It's like the Big Bang Theory with biology, right? It's kind of turned the Cassandra tree of life upside down. We're not starting with simple stuff anymore. We're starting with major things happening all the time. Yeah, it's amazing, and the science goes on, and it continues to develop theories.
Yeah.
But the more they develop, the more fascinating things they find out.
And yeah, it's so interesting that I don't have a chemistry background, and but Ed has a great concept and great ability to have more than me understanding of all this. And so why we tell you this is to affect your growth mindset, to blow your mind so that you think, whoa, what's going on here? How did all of this happen? Is it a big mistake? Was it chaos? Was this wonderful structure and fine-tuning created out of primordial soup?
Yeah, must have been very important soup.
Yeah.
Well, now the biggest puzzle of all, and this is odd because you think of all the mysteries we talked about, but the biggest puzzle of all is our consciousness. And of course, no one's figured that out yet, but it's the hottest debate, really. What makes us able to be conscious? What is it? What is it? There's basically 2 camps here, of course. There's 2 camps of everything. One camp thinks that the brain and the mind are one thing. They think that, of course, everything's made of material stuff. There's nothing beyond that. So the brain, with its working, emits the mind. In other words, you think you're conscious, but it's really just your brain working. Yeah. Now, the other part is the brain and the mind are different. And so, they're... it's called the immaterial, and it allows you to introspect. And this is not a hard concept for most people. Oh yeah, I can actually think about my brain. It's not just my brain thinking about my mind. 2 examples. The famous Thomas Huxley. Mind is a function of matter when that matter has attained a certain degree of organization. Well, then there's the other one where they believe that they're the same. An example is a Wilfred Penfield. And so he's considered the father of modern surgery. And he worked with 1,000 epileptic people, and he could see that their minds and their brains were actually different things. They weren't exactly the same. What are the implications? What are the implications of that? Well, if your brain admits your mind, then you really don't have free will, because it's just the mechanisms happening. And people believe that, they can't live that way, but they believe that, that they really don't have free will, and that once your brain stops, everything else does too. And, they actually can live that way. It's kind of a hopeless way to live. But then there are those who believe that the mind and the brain are different, and that you actually have some control over your brain, and you have free will. You can act morally, and at death, the mind and your soul remain, and your fate, therefore, is a concern for you, which we will cover next time.
Yeah. More to come.
More to come on number 3. Thank you very much.